Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we're joined by Kieran McAnulty, the shadow leader of the House and Labor spokesperson for housing, infrastructure and public investment. Hey Kieran, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Let's start with the so-called independent review of Kāinga Ora and the notion that Kāinga Ora was financially unsustainable. At the time, you called this out as not being based on fact and more being about saving money. The review was hardly independent. We all saw the text going on between Sir Bill English and Chris Bishop. And really, they left out the value of the assets that were on the government books at the time, so it seemed a bit flawed. It seemed also that the government were determined to basically cripple state housing and rebrand it as social housing in order to level a playing field with private community housing providers. And to me, that sounded, this whole turnaround job they called it, sounded a lot like neoliberal ideology at work. But from your point of view, what happened and what do you think about it now?
Well, the whole report was a complete farce. And that was shown, as you alluded to, with the prior communications between Sir Bill English and Chris Bishop. But the fact that they tried to label a report done by Bill English when he has publicly made it clear that essentially he doesn't believe it's the state's job to provide state housing, was involved in a government that sold state houses off completely and then was Prime Minister in the subsequent national government, which ended up with 1,500 fewer social houses than when they began. And the report coincidentally landed in exactly the same position of his government at the time. I think everyone can see it for what it is. The chair of Kāinga Ora appeared in front of a select committee at the time and said that, no, Kāinga Ora is in a really strong financial position. We can build more houses. They corrected many of the things that was in the draft report, all of which was ignored. They pointed out that there were factual inaccuracies in the report, and they remained. So it says to me that it was clearly a preconceived idea, a PR exercise to try and give the government some cover from pulling out of building state houses. They replaced the board, and then all of a sudden the new board chair says, no, we need to pull back, we're in trouble. It doesn't add up to me. It doesn't stack up, I should say. And here we are in a situation where homelessness is growing at unprecedented levels. The government isn't expanding the Kāinga Ora stock. They've significantly reduced funding in real terms to community housing providers. There just simply isn't enough houses being built, and that's all down to this government's decisions.
Exactly. Let's talk about the so-called fiscal cliff terminology that was used by Chris Bishop, which I think was about suddenly stopping funding for state house building and only funding 1,500 state or social houses when there were thousands more being built under Labor. And Chris Bishop kept saying, we're building more, like more than zero, when really Bishop was dithering around and stalling the building of houses. Building less, actually. More was less. And you've called this out. But how has Chris Bishop got away with saying, that we're building more and got away with that kind of rubbish talk in our press?
I'm not sure he has got away with it, to be honest. There's a fair bit of attention on this government's housing policies at the moment. It's quite evident to everyone that homelessness is increasing. It's becoming more visible on our streets. The number of people in housing deprivation has, like I said, increased at unprecedented levels. And there's a fair bit of scrutiny being labelled towards the government now. So they're trying to deflect and distract, but I'm not sure that tactic is working, and we'll continue to keep the pressure on them. I think most reasonable people can see that there is a clear link between not expanding the Kāinga Ora stock, not funding community housing providers adequately, and certainly not up to the levels that they were promised, and essentially blocking people from entering emergency housing. Lo and behold, homelessness is growing. So most people can see that, and even National Party people are on the record now saying that this is not good enough and actually quite abhorrent, really, when you consider that there are people with children living on the street when they should be in secure homes, and the only way to do that is to build homes, and they're not doing that. But if we look to your question around fiscal cliffs, this is again just another farce. It is a political exercise to try and make it look like these guys are the saviour, when in fact that they are not. Every government in the history of time, when they've allocated funding, have allocated funding for a certain period of time. It might be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever. At the end of that period of funding, the government is required to expand the funding, and sometimes that falls on new governments. And so they made a big song and a dance when they first came into government about, oh, we've got all these fiscal cliffs. Rubbish. You've got a period of funding from the previous government, which incidentally, if they look through the manifesto of the Labour Party, if we were re-elected, we had pledged to continue funding in every single one of them. The thing is that what they were trying to do was make it out that, one, they don't have to continue the funding because there was a fiscal cliff, so to speak. But even when they did announce funding, lo and behold, it was time limited. There will be a period when that funding ceases and they will be required to continue that funding. Anything short of a commitment to fund a program or an initiative for the rest of time is in their definition of fiscal cliff. It's nonsense. It's just how governments operate within their budgets. And every single time the government announces something, just look at when that funding finishes. They themselves, in their own definition, are doing a fiscal cliff.
Great. You mentioned not the community housing providers not actually getting enough, and as I understand it, they get a kind of a top-up to bring up rents to a market rate. But they're also now, about 5 of them, getting access to government loans, and Chris Bishop's claimed that he's levelling the playing field between Kāinga Ora and community housing providers here. And he's saying he's agnostic, about who builds the houses. But it doesn't sound very agnostic. It actually sounds quite religious, and about balancing some, I don't know, private sector ideology or something. I don't know. But you're saying the community housing providers aren't getting enough anyway. Now, didn't Bishop drag on for about a year before he got round to kind of funding this? And what are the outcomes you're now seeing and hearing about out there?
Yeah, well, let's be really clear right from the outset. I firmly believe that community housing providers have a pivotal role to play. They can do things that Kāinga Ora can't, and Kāinga Ora can do things that community housing providers can't. And if we are actually going to tackle the housing shortage in this country, we need both Kāinga Ora and community housing providers supported by this government. And leading up to the last election, there were some pretty firm promises made by the National Party. Nicola Willis signed a pledge to say that they would build a net increase of 1,000 social houses in Auckland alone. Tama Pōtaka promised that he would build more houses than the Labour government, which was a lofty promise because, of course, the Labour government built more houses in its 6 years than any other previous government since the 1950s. And Chris Bishop went around the country promising that community housing providers would be supported. Now, they came into government, they dithered until they were caught out and something was leaked, and they had to quickly rush an announcement that they were going to fund 1,500 social houses by scrapping the First Home grant. Now, the First Home grant helped roughly around 10,000 people a year to buy a house. What we found over the years is that so many people can get up to the line but really struggled to get over the line with a deposit, and that First Home grant really helped them across the line. Just scrap that overnight without any warning or anything to make it look like they were funding community housing providers. But actually, that was $750 a year this financial year and next financial year. So that period between the election and the budget, that uncertainty meant that large providers like the Salvation Army, who do amazing work, had to pause and cancel projects. And once you pause or cancel the project, it takes a long time to get that going again. So there was a massive amount of uncertainty there. Now, when you look at the numbers, only 750, like I say, this financial year and next financial year. There was 550 funded in this most recent budget only for Auckland. that pales in comparison to the level of funding and the output between Kāinga Ora and community housing providers under us. Upwards of 5,000 houses a year were being built towards the end, and now we're dropping down to this dribble of funding. One that doesn't live up to the promise that they were going to back community housing providers who took that on their word and were ready to go and are still ready to go and would build houses if only the government funded them, but of course they're not. When I asked Chris Bishop during Scrutiny Week in Select Committee whether they were going to live up to their pledged promise of 1,000 net increased houses in Auckland, they said yes. I said, really? Because 750 houses for the whole country this financial year doesn't meet up. Neither does the 750 next year. Even if you add up the 550 for Auckland, it still doesn't add up to 1,000 net increase when you spread all the others across the country. And he said, oh no, we've been building thousands of homes a year. Rubbish. They are now so desperate to make it look like they're doing something, they are counting the houses that were funded by the previous government and were under construction when they came in. They can't pull the wool over New Zealanders' eyes. They can see that for what it is. That's absolute rubbish. And so that can only last so long. And to your point earlier about they're getting away with it, they absolutely are not. They are not living up to their promises, and they're not delivering what this country needs. And more people are living in deprivation as a result.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What have National recently said about people sleeping rough?
Well, Mark Mitchell, that bastion of empathy that he is, he said that homelessness was a lifestyle choice. I mean, how disgraceful can you get? And he knows that's not the case. You know, I know Mark Mitchell well enough to know that deep down he knows that people are in homelessness and housing deprivation, not because they choose to be, because they've been forced to be for economic circumstances or personal circumstances or whatever. The only difference is, of course, that previously, if people found themselves in those circumstances, and I always look at it as there but for the grace of God go I. I mean, most of us are only 2 or 3 paychecks from financial trouble. And we only need a few things to go against us to fall in that situation ourselves. Not because we choose to, because that's the way things have played out. If they found themselves in that situation, they would be able to get access to emergency accommodation. Now, look, let's be really clear. Emergency accommodation is not the solution to the housing crisis, but it is the solution to people sleeping on the street. And as long as the government is building houses or supporting community housing providers to build houses, over time, they will be able to go into those houses. But whilst those houses are being built, or in the situation we're in now, not being built, the only option they have is to go into emergency housing. But of course, they've cut that off. They have gone around the country telling everyone it is a moral and fiscal failure. And I want to emphasise that. They don't want to spend the money. And they have denied till they're blue in the face that that is the situation. And all the while, people have been denied access to emergency housing. The level of declines have increased 150%, whilst the applications have dropped. They've fallen through the floor. No one believes them when they say that they have met their target 5 years early, that all of a sudden, miraculously, there were 4,000 people in emergency housing, and now across the whole country there's only 600 people that need emergency housing. Absolute rubbish. No one believes that. All they've done is stop people accessing emergency housing because they want to save money. Now, they can deny that, but I'll put one simple question to them. Why then, leading up to the budget, did they put out a PR celebrating the fact they'd saved $1 billion because of their changes to emergency housing? All this is about is to save money to pay for the gaps for Nicola Willis's stupid policies and her inability to make things add up. And so people and children are living on the street because these guys can't do their books properly. It's disgraceful.
When it comes to emergency housing and what providers who work with the homeless are saying, we've heard one story from them about people being turned away by WINS as if they were partly responsible for their own homelessness. And we've heard a kind of slippery story from Tama Potaka about whether we're talking about homelessness from years ago in the previous census, and he disputes what providers are saying. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about this? Because it sounds like an absolute complete shocker to the public.
Yeah, well, actually, this is something I didn't actually know until I became housing spokesperson. But the only official measure, or the most robust measure, is how the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development put it, is the census every 5 years. And I just didn't know that. I wouldn't have thought that the census would be an accurate measure of homelessness, and I wouldn't have thought that filling out the census would have been a priority if you don't have a place to sleep. But nevertheless, that's where we're at, and so that's something that as housing spokesperson I'm putting a lot of work into, that what we can change when we are next in government, because it's beyond belief that governments would be setting policies on homelessness without at least an attempt to try and get some level of measure as to the extent of the problem. But of course that suits this government. They're quite happy to say, oh, well, no, the census is the only measure, or say, oh, look, the numbers in the social housing register have dropped, whereas everybody will tell you that if no one thinks they have a chance of getting a social house, they don't see the point in putting themselves on the register. And the Minister, Chris Bishop's actually on record to say that the housing register is not an accurate measure of need, yet they're quite happy to point to it to try and make a political point. These things are not accurate measures. And the only thing between the census that the government can really go on is feedback from frontline providers. And they are all saying that this government's policies have led to an unprecedented increase in homelessness. Now look, I'm not trying to pretend that homelessness is a new phenomenon. It has been around tragically for a long time in this country. But when you have the Wellington City Mission saying that things are the worst they have ever been, and they've been in operation for over a century, and you've got other providers saying that things are growing at rates like they've never seen before, you would expect the government to actually take notice. So we're now in a situation where pretty much everyone in the country that knows about this is telling it as it is, except for Christopher Luxon, Chris Bishop and Tama Pōtaka, who say nothing to see here. But the problem for them is that now their official documents are starting to say this. There's a homelessness insights report that is released pretty much every 6 months, and the last version of those indicated that homelessness is increasing. The next one is due in about a week's time. We'll be keeping a very close eye on that. You can guarantee that that'll say that things have gotten even worse. All the frontline providers are saying it's quite clear that the reason homelessness is going up is because this government is stopping people from accessing emergency housing. And incidentally, all the people that have left emergency housing for a stable, secure home have gone into a home that the previous government paid for and built. So with this government essentially stopping Kaingaora building new additional houses and restricting the number of houses that community housing providers are building, you only know that this is going to go in one direction. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about investment now in infrastructure. When it comes to investment in infrastructure, Chris Bishop has kept changing his story, I think, about Labor's position on PPPs. One day, Chris Bishop says Labor's changed its position 14 times, and the next day he says it's changed its position 9 times. But the fact to me is Labor hasn't changed its position at all. It's been consistent all the way about its position. So could you tell our audience what is Labor's position on PPPs and what is Bishop going on about here?
Well, the question of what is Bishop going on about is a perennial and will exist for as long as he's in politics. It's my pick. But the thing is with PPPs is that we're putting a fair bit of pressure on the government to actually act in a bipartisan way. And so far their attitude has been, we'll work with you if you agree with us. And our view is that's not how it works, mate. Look, there's certain things like investment, infrastructure, the RMA reforms, where we're firm of the view that if National works with us, we can give everybody certainty that a change in government doesn't have to be a change in approach. We can disagree on certain things like priority projects or whatever, but the fundamentals, the actual structure of this shouldn't be political. We've got people that want to build things but don't know what they're dealing with, and a lot of that is this government's making. The RMA was reformed, this government scrapped it, and then say, oh look, the RMA isn't working. Well, that's no surprise. You shouldn't have scrapped it. And so we've said to them, work with us on the development of the new RMA. Don't worry about your mad mates. Come to an agreement. You won't get everything you want. We won't get everything we want, but it'll give everyone certainty that it will stand the test of time. And it's exactly the same with infrastructure. We are bending over backwards to be bipartisan on this. We attended the International Investor Summit and used the breaks in the itinerary, like the coffee breaks and the lunch break, to meet with overseas investors and say to them that we will honour contracts that are entered into, that if the Labor Party gets into government next time, that we will continue working with you. Don't listen to the government. We want to see things like hospitals and roading and core infrastructure like rail and other things like that built in this country. And actually, there is a role for overseas investment to play here. But what we absolutely draw the line on is privatisation. We will not be selling core infrastructure, and we do not want overseas or any private organisation running the things. So we don't want private organisations running our hospitals, and we don't want them running our schools, but we're more than happy to work with them to build them if it works out cheaper for the taxpayer, and that has always been our position. With PPPs, it often does get confused with privatisation, so we go out of our way to explain to people what our position is, that we're against privatisation, we're open to PPPs, and of course others twist that to make it look like we have a different position or that we are confusing it. But we're very conscious that the idea of a PPP hasn't had a very good history in this country. And so a lot of people also conflate the two. We're just being really clear. But here's the thing. It's not actually a debate of whether PPPs are good or bad. It should be a debate on what is the contract, because we've had some shockers in this country, but there are examples overseas where it's worked, where government and or the state, on behalf of the people, have maintained ownership. They have maintained the operation of it, but they've been able to use it as a procurement tool to get a better deal for the taxpayer. And so we're open to that. But of course, I'm starting to think that for some members of the government, that's not in their interest to make it look like we're being constructive, so they want to twist it a little bit.
Well, one of the perceptions that a lot of people in the public got was that Bishop's pleading for bipartisanship only after he's torn up everything that previous governments had put in place. He suddenly wants everyone to kind of just agree with him, like you said. And so it goes down pretty badly. It doesn't look like bipartisanship at all.
Well, the irony isn't lost, of course. I mean, if we wanted to, we could point out numerous things where the government has scrapped something and then turned around and said, why don't you work with us? Well, yeah. But I think that that's there. Everyone knows that. They know that we had a bipartisan agreement on densification that the National Party signed up to, and then because of pressure from ACT, they pulled out of. They know that they've scrapped things like the RMA and then want to say, oh, why don't we work with them on that? But you know, we could spend our time pointing that out, but to be honest, I think it's more constructive to just get on with it. You know, at the end of the day, we will benefit more as a country if, where possible, you resist the urge to make these political points. You might point it out, but don't. We're not going to dwell on it. Like we've made our point. We don't believe they should have done it. The National Party have had a terrible record of this in the past, but we're still going to try and work with them where we can. It doesn't mean working with them on things like this doesn't mean we can't be critical in other areas. We most certainly are. Take housing, for example, right? So a lot of the planning stuff that Bishop has announced actually builds on what we did in government. And in fairness to Bishop, he has pointed out that a lot of the work that Phil Twyford has done paved the way for the work that he's doing. And there are more things in housing that we have said that we will support because we need more housing. And if something is going to lead to more housing, I don't care whose idea it was. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea. But that also allows us to criticise quite heavily their appalling approach to the likes of social housing, emergency housing, the fact that they have created uncertainty in the sector, that 15,000 people working in construction have lost their jobs and many of them have gone to Australia. That is all this government's doing, and we are pulling them up on that. But I actually think why we're starting to get a little bit of headway in that is because people can see, okay, well, you know, they have been constructive in all these things. Clearly they're not being political here. They're calling it as it is. Maybe we should listen.
Fast-track consenting and the government's decision to select 149 projects or applications that could have developments fast-tracked. It can contravene the rules of the House about what could be in a government bill, according to the clerk. But the Speaker overruled this. You said that this raised serious constitutional questions about the passing of a government bill that provides for a private benefit. Could you tell our audience a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's long-standing conventions in our parliamentary system that Parliament should not pass laws that will directly provide a private benefit, so either to an individual or a business or whatever like that, that they can set the rules that provide for public benefit, they can set the rules that then go through a process and all that sort of stuff, but it shouldn't be directly legislating laws that have a clear private benefit. And the way that the government went about the fast track was shoddy at best and appalling at worst, and I lean more towards the appalling side of things, because let's not forget a bit of context here. We reformed the RMA, we recognised that the RMA wasn't working, we did a lot of work under David Parker to amend that. The government got rid of that to go back to the old RMA. They then pointed to the old RMA and said, this isn't working, so we need the fast track. This was all part of it. And so they didn't follow proper process. They had an amendment paper that they introduced late in the piece that didn't go through select committee and wasn't available for public consultation or feedback. They just dumped this massive document at the committee stage. Now, within that document, there was clear private benefit, and the clerk, who advises the Speaker and Parliament on these matters, said that the amendment should not be included in part because it's getting included late in the piece, and and perhaps if it was included right at the start, there would have been an opportunity for the select committee to go through it and potentially pull out those bits and leave it as it is. But he essentially said that this amendment allows for private benefit of individuals and companies and should not be allowed. The presiding officer at the time, Barbara Kuriger, agreed with the clerk, which of course presiding officers have always done on matters like this. But in a move that no one else can find any example of previously, the Speaker overruled the clerk. Now, we found that to be incredibly serious because, one, we opposed this bill because we felt that it isn't proper process and goes far beyond a fast-track regime that we had in place over COVID. They tried to give ministers direct approval and backtracked on that because of public pressure, and it was still a poor piece of legislation. And then you had this serious constitutional question over this. So this led to us withdrawing our confidence in the Speaker, and that position hasn't changed. And we didn't take that lightly because actually at an individual personal level, I have a very good working relationship with Jerry Brownlee, but we fundamentally disagreed with his decision. We don't think it was right. He should not have intervened over the head of the clerk. It's created, I believe, an unfortunate precedent for future parliaments. And the question should clearly have been, if the government was that confident in this piece of legislation, why didn't they include that amendment right at the start and go through a proper select committee process? I think the answer is because they knew they were doing something dodgy and they wanted to avoid scrutiny.
Thanks. Right, well, when it comes to foreign investment, direct foreign investment, what's your position on making changes to the Overseas Investment Act? Because we're seeing a lot of talk about opening up New Zealand and selling it off to foreign investors to kind of solve some of our growth problems. What's your take on that?
Well, it's quite simple. Foreign investment has a role to play, but it should be tightly controlled and restricted. So, for example, we don't believe in privatisation of core public assets. We do not believe in foreign investment in residential property, for example, because there aren't enough incentives for there to be new houses being built. There were when we were in. The government scrapped many of them. And the last thing we need is foreign investors who can pay more than many New Zealanders fighting over existing stock and driving house prices up. So we're not in favour of that at all. In fact, we put measures in place when we were in government to stop that. and there has been talk under this government that they're going to relieve some of that. We'll be watching that very closely and pushing back as hard as we can, because even if it is at the top end, say for a house that's worth a couple of $1 million or more, that will have flow-on effects. It means that those Kiwis that can't buy those houses will now buy the one under, and that pushes those lower, and eventually it'll flow down. We just firmly do not believe in foreign investment in residential property. We did support a carve-out for build-to-rents, because the advice was that there would be less build-to-rent, which is a separate asset class and can't swap and change. It has to remain build-to-rent for the existence of that building. The advice was that there would be fewer build-to-rent units built if foreign investment wasn't allowed to go in it. It was okay, well, let's be pragmatic about this. If that sort of investment is going to lead to more houses and is going to allow more people to have security of tenure and affordable rental, it's not like an overseas investor buying a house for capital gain. They're actually investing in something that's going to benefit New Zealanders. Yeah, okay, we're open to that. But across the board, it's a flat no on residential housing. But if an overseas investment can come and say, build a road cheaper, and there is long-term benefits for New Zealanders, they might put a toll on it, for example. In that instance, as long as there is an alternative route that's up to standard, that's free, that might take longer, but you've got an option there, sure, we're open to that.
Okay, well, let's talk about tolls. There's a story there about a road that was going to be tolled, but then it wasn't tolled. The Manawatu-Tararua Highway. It's now open, and it's not a toll road. But Simeon Brown very much looked like he was heading that way of tolling this. What happened there?
Oh, look, it wasn't just Simeon Brown, it was the local national MPs as well. They've done more flip-flops on this than a circus, I tell you. The story is that back in 2017, the Manawatu Gorge, a crucial link between east and west in the lower North Island, got permanently closed due to what was the latest of a series of slips. You know, I've grown up in the area my entire life and can always remember there being slips on that road. It eventually got to the point where they decided that they simply can't justify reopening it. And so the national government at the time ummed and ahed and actually publicly toyed with the idea of not basically keeping it closed essentially, and just relying on the two local roads as an alternative. We announced when we were in opposition at the time that we would fully fund and build an alternative route. We won the election. We started that work. We fully funded it. The work got underway. It was actually a unique project. It was in partnership with the local community, with local iwi. It had a commitment to employing locals. It was a massive achievement. It was because of the partnership amongst all those groups. The consenting process was streamlined because everyone was on board. It's exactly how roads should be built in this country. Now, of course, there was a change of government, and only a matter of months before this road was due to be opened, this government decided that they were going to lump a toll on this. And that came out of the blue for everybody because, of course, there is no viable alternative route. There's these local roads, which as local MP I fought really hard to get NZTA to take over responsibility from the councils, because there's no way the local council could have afforded to keep the maintenance of these roads with the volume of traffic that was going over, and we won that one. But the NZTA were going to hand these local roads back to the councils, and if this toll was put on, no one really would be able to afford to do it, because so many people travel from Tararua to Palmerston North for work or school every day. Paying a toll twice a day, they wouldn't be able to afford. So they'd use these local roads. The council wouldn't be able to afford to maintain it. It was just an absolute kick in the guts to this community who, like I said, had worked hand in glove with the government and NZTA to get this project across the line. We're not opposed to tolls, but make sure that that's part of the proposal right at the start. No, don't lump one on there only a couple of months from the project being completed. So there was this massive uproar in the community. Tangiuta Kitty, my mate from the other side of the range in Palmerston North, he joined with me and we went alongside the community and we fought really hard. And it was a massive win for the community that the government backtracked. But it's really important for everybody to know that right throughout that process, Simeon Brown, who was Minister at the time, defended the poll, and Suze Redmayne and Mike Butterick defended it. Mike is on record. You can see it, I think it's It's certainly still available online, defending the proposal of the toll. So he was absolutely absent in this. And then what was a pretty galling is that when the government backtracked on it, those two did a video to social media to celebrate the decision. And I just thought, that's pretty disingenuous. You refused to stand alongside the community. You might have turned up to these meetings, but you were asked repeatedly, will you stand alongside the community and oppose the toll? And not once did you say that you would. In fact, you tried to avoid the question, and then they try and celebrate the decision. Well, do you know what? Everybody saw that for what it was. And so when Tangi and I turned up to the opening of their road in our toll-free Tararua t-shirts, the number of people that came up to us and shook our hand and said, good on you for joining with us and fighting this. This should never have had a toll on it. So stoked that it doesn't have one. It's massive. It's already starting to see a boost in the local community. Woodville's going gangbusters. I expect we'll see more housing in the region, more jobs. It'll be huge. But we must never forget what the National Party tried to do to that road.
Exactly. Right, well, last question, and this is one that's really about constituency. And when it comes to the High Court settlement, what happened to the money awarded for the Wairarapa Hospital in a confidential settlement? Could you tell our audience how Simeon Brown failed to answer your questions about what happened to that money that should have been ring-fenced for the Wairarapa Hospital?
Well, that is the $90 million question, mate. What happened to that money? And I have tried so many times to try and get the minister to answer what should be a pretty simple question. So just for those that don't know the context, I'll go over it really quickly. The Wairarapa Hospital was deemed to have been structurally unsound. This was when the Wairarapa DHB was there. And so they tried to get money from those that oversaw the build, the likes of the engineers and the contractor and the local council, but essentially the statute of limitations had kicked in and the council was the last man standing. And we can debate whether that's right or wrong, but that's the situation. Then the health mergers went ahead and Health New Zealand took over from the DHB. They assessed the situation and basically decided, well, Wairarapa Hospital is stuffed. We pretty much need a new hospital. And so sued the Masterton District Council for $90 million. Now, they settled out of court, and that is a confidential settlement for legitimate reasons. So not once have I asked what the settlement was, but you'd have to think if Health New Zealand was suing for $90 million to build a new hospital when they settled out of court, they had a pretty strong case, it would have been substantial. And so we're talking about a hell of a lot of money to fix Wairarapa Hospital. Now, surely everyone would agree that if there's a court settlement for a specific purpose, that money should be used solely for that purpose. Well, it's disappeared. The money has just gone, and it's definitely not being built on Wairarapa Hospital. There was $1.5 million that was spent on strengthening what I think was the entranceway. And initially, when I started asking Simeon Brown about this, he pointed to that money. Now, that money was spent under us, and it was spent before the settlement. So that's got nothing to do with it. And if he's suggesting that Health New Zealand was suing for $90 million and $1.5 million was all that was needed, I don't think anyone's going to believe him. So there's potentially tens of millions of dollars out there that should have been spent on fixing Masterton Hospital, and that could have gone a long way. It could have strengthened the structural problems. We need a bigger ED department. We need at least a couple of wards and a theatre. And we have a real staffing issue there. But the problem is, of course, we need the staff, but we don't have any space to put them. And this could have solved all our problems. Money that was ring-fenced for us. Now, Simeon Brown, in my view, has taken the money. Health New Zealand has said, this government has essentially underfunded us. We're under these massive cuts. We've got a hiring freeze underway. We're desperate for money. We'll take that. Thanks very much, Wairarapa. And I've asked him really simple questions. Can he guarantee that all of the money from that settlement will be spent on the hospital? Refused to answer. Can he tell us if any of that money has been spent elsewhere? Refused to answer. He initially tried to use the confidentiality claim. That doesn't stack up because that's only the settlement, and I've never asked how much the settlement was. I just want to know where the money has gone. It's a simple yes or no, right? He's refusing. Then, when I pushed more, he tried to say, oh no, it's not in public interest. Rubbish. He is desperately trying to avoid it. When I asked him during scrutiny week, he fluffed and bumbled and diverted and tried to distract, but I think it was pretty obvious. I mean, they've taken the money for another region. It's a genuine disgrace. The Ombudsman has confirmed that they are going to investigate the Minister's refusal to answer and Health New Zealand's refusal to answer. So there's more to play out here.
Good on you, Kieran. Thanks for talking to us all at G News today. It's been really good to hear your straight talk and have a good yarn with you about what's really been going on in housing, infrastructure and public investment. Have a great campaign, and hopefully we'll have you back here again well before that's over. So all power to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Happy to be here, happy to come back, and keep up the good work. You're doing some awesome work on there.
Cheers. Talk to you again soon.
Cheers.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah.